The reason we're sharing this is to talk about the importance in voter turnout between now and Tuesday, Sunday afternoon at about 12:10. And what we do as individuals between now and the end of election day is going to make a difference, not just in this election, but in elections to come for Arkansas. And I want to show you how important voter turnout is. I'm going to have a specific call to action at the end of this video on how you can get involved and make a difference in this. So I want to go over some data that I think a lot of you will find very interesting, and you'll see how important it is for you to get out as many friends and family to vote as possible. So I want to look back historically on trends with voting in Arkansas. So we're going to look at the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and the 2024 election, which were all presidential elections. And then because the most recent governor's election in 2022 shows some more trending data, we're going to get some more like micro data out of that. So if we look at the turnout trends right now, in 2016 and 2020, in Arkansas, it was almost virtually the same. We had 1,130,000 voters in 2016, and even during the pandemic, we had 1,184,000 in 2020. The turnout this year is going to determine what happens in the election, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. And we'll talk about how 907,000 in 2022 plays into this also. But you can see historically, if we have the same number of people that turn out, we'll talk about what the numbers will look like later. In the 2016 election, this is when we had Donald Trump running against Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump in this election won 684,000 votes to 380,000 votes. That's a 304,000 vote difference. Keep two things in mind. What was the number of people different that voted in the election in Arkansas? And also what percentage of the population voted for the Democrat versus the Republican at the top of the ticket? So in this case, Trump had 60.5% of the vote went for the Republican top of the ticket, and 33.6% of the vote went to the top of the ticket to the Democrat. Now we jump to the 2020 election. There's factors that came into play because the pandemic was in play. Early voting was at a record high because people were afraid to be at the polls during on election day with a lot of people. I feel like turnout would have trended up in that election, but a lot of people in Arkansas stayed home. But the same number of people came out, regardless of what the input data was. Let's look at the numbers. So in that election, we had 760,000 Arkansans vote at the top of the ticket for the Republican, which was Trump, which was 62.4%, which trended up. And I've looked at the data that goes all the way back to 2000. And every year, the data has trended up a little bit more for the Republican. And you see that happened from 2016 to 2020 also. We saw about a 1.9% bump in the percentage of people. That's important when we come back later. There were 424,000 Democrats that people that voted for the Democrat at the top of the ticket, which was about 34.78%, which you can see was also an increase in the percentage, which meant there were less people that were voting independent, that were voting libertarian, and people that were normally voting in Arkansas started deciding, I'm going one side or the other. So the independents and optionals over that election went into different camps. And that's going to be important coming up. But you'll see in that election, there were 30,000 more people that voted for the Republican than what voted for the Democrat at the top of the ticket. The trend was still going up for the Republicans at that point. So we're in the 24 election now. So what we're doing is looking at trends. How are people moving either toward Democrat or away from Democrat? And now we're going to the top of the ticket, we're going to talk about the race with Sarah Huckabee Sanders versus Chris Jones, because it was a midterm election. we always have less people voting in the midterm elections than we have in the presidential elections. So when we went from 1.184 million people to just under a million people voting in the election, that is a typical trend of midterm elections. But you're going to see some other trends that kind of started changing a little bit. In that 907,000 that voted, you're going to see the same statistical base that voted for Trump in 2020 also voted for Sanders in 2022. So 62.3% versus 62.4%. It's literally the same people voted for Trump, then voted for Sanders. So that's an important trend number to keep in mind when we're looking at this election. So in that election, you're going to see that Chris Jones continued the trend that happened from Clinton, moving more Arkansans. Biden moved more Arkansans to the Democratic base. And Chris Jones then did even the same amount again of moving more Democrats to the base. So this election, there were 252,000 people that were different between the top of the ticket Republican and the top of the ticket Democrat. So that's as far as we know. Now, we're looking at this election where across the state, we have multiple counties that have reported record numbers early turnout. We also have seen record numbers of new registered voters. Those two numbers are something that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at trends. So while new registered voters is important in Arkansas is because we have two statistics. Arkansas ranks consistently last in the nation in number of registered voters. We're 51 out of 51. There was a study done, and when you include Washington, D.C., Arkansas is dead last in the number of citizens that we register to vote. We're also number 51 in the number of voters that turn out to vote. And in the 2020 and 2022 elections, that held true. But in Arkansas, with direct democracy, with higher quality down-ballot candidates, with more participation on local level, we have seen record number of registered voters. They were showing that after Kamala Harris got into the race, we registered over 1,000 people a day in the state of Arkansas. And there's been almost 100,000 people that's been registered since then. So we know that there are 1.8 million registered voters in Arkansas. And we've had roughly 600,000 people that have registered so far early voting, which is a trend up, even considering the pandemic. So we're going to look at what happens based on the only polls we know, which is national polls and local state polls that are consistently showing that Trump is leading in Arkansas 55% to 45%. If those polls are true, and I'm not going to give a whole lot of credence to polls, but we have to know that we have more people coming to the polls and we have more people that were registered to vote. So that number of people are probably trending one way or another. And what all the polling is showing is that they're going from a 62% Republican base to a 55% Republican base. And from a 35% Democrat base to a 45% Democrat base. If that is true, if we statistically are flat in the number of people that we turn out in this election, that means we just go like from the 1.13 to the 1.184 to the 1.2. That's just a statistic like nothing changes. Then the numbers, if it's 55 to 45, would show that there's 660,000 people coming out to vote for Trump versus 540,000 coming out to vote for Harris. Now, what you want to do is look at the previous election, which was the 2020 election. And if those numbers are true, that means that Trump has lost 100,000 people from his support to this point. And we have gone up 125,000 for Harris, which means that we have not just taken away from the Republicans, but the Democrats have added to their base. based on polling for national numbers and based on if that just holds. But since we know that we've increased the number of voters that are going to the polls, and we're already showing that the trends are moving toward Harris in this election in Arkansas, you have to assume that new voters that are coming to the poll for Harris don't go down the list and go Harris and then vote Republican down ballot. We're going to assume that the majority of Harris's votes will down ballot to the Democrats, which means that if we put 15% more voter turnout, which is where we're trending, it will put a 1.4 million person in the polls. This is why that's important. That means that we're trending to have 200,000 more people go to the polls in this election than what went in the last election. And you think we have to get all 200,000 because that would be impossible. But all we really need to get is 6 in 10 of those to make this a dead heat race. Because if we were already sitting at 55-45 and we're flat, there's only 120,000 more votes that we need to make up to get to 50-50. And we know that we've added 200,000 more people to the votes if we get a 15% turnout increase. And if we get 6 out of 10, that's 120,000, and this is a 50-50 race, y'all. That not only means that Arkansas could flip 4 electoral votes, I think it's 4, maybe 6, to Harris, but we also get that 50+% down ballot in races all over the state where we've been close anyway. So any of the races that previously were running 40% or better, like the Carolyn Brown, Kate Eberly, or Cassandra Green, Brandon Aker, any of these that were real close in the last election, the down ballot will flip those to Democrat, and we're going to flip seats all over. So the important thing is, only 1/3 of the people eligible to vote in Arkansas have voted. And now it's up to us to make sure that the majority of the new people that come to the polls between now and Tuesday overwhelmingly vote down ballot Democrats. Because if we do that, we can trend above 40%. If we can get to the 45, 46, 47, 50% for Harris, we're going to flip Democratic House seats. We're going to have John Pagan has a shot at this election. We have Karen Baker that can win this election. We have things that will flip all over the state that will help us trend ready for 26. So it's so important right now more than ever to get this message out to us in Arkansas that are voting, that want to make a difference, because we're close, y'all. And this is the only thing that we're being told, and they're very consistent. Everybody, the Republicans are saying it's 55-45. But if it's 55-45, we still have a chance. Get on there, call 10 people you know, make sure you get everybody to the polls. Let's go.